Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate it. This week, I'm interviewing Larry Jorgensen. Now, for long-time listeners, if that sounds familiar, it's because I've actually interviewed him before. It's the first time I've had a repeat guest, but I wanted to have Larry back on. He's written another book. For those who haven't checked out his previous interview, about a year ago, he wrote several books about the history of Coca Cola. Super fascinating. Kind of the teasers are Coca-Cola stole Santa Claus, and Coca-Cola, does it really have cocaine in it like people thought, or did it ever used to? So many amazing things in that book. But this book that we talked about, really fascinating history lesson. I let him kind of talk most of the time, give us the history, but it's about a shipwreck that happened in November of 1926 up in the Great Lakes, near Copper Harbor, Michigan, up kind of in the UP area, Upper Peninsula. This ship had a bunch of Chrysler cars on it, and it had wrecked into the bank. All these cars had to be taken off the boat. The crew had to be saved. Fascinating story. He's going to get all into it, how the town of Copper Harbor kind of came together, saved these crew members, saved these these old 1926 Chryslers. It was kind of in the early days of cars at all. What it was, 20, 30 years into cars, and now they've got to get all these out of the tundra of Upper Michigan at that time. So I think you're really going to enjoy this story. Definitely, if you like kind of just history lesson. I'm sure most of you haven't heard of the city of Bangor. That's the ship's name that was shipwrecked. It was a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that I had Larry back on. I really think you're going to enjoy this. We're going to talk, like I said, about the city of Bangor, which is the ship. We're going to talk about Copper Harbor. We're going to talk about exactly what happened in 1926. And then also the process of just researching and writing this book. He is so amazing when he comes to just researching these interesting topics that sometimes he goes into these libraries to do research and they hadn't even heard about what he's researching. So amazing guy, amazing book. The book's called Shipwrecked and Rescued. He's going to tell you all about it and how to catch that book. But here is Larry Jorgensen. I'm here today with Larry Jorgensen again. You're actually the first person, Larry, that I've talked to a second time. So I don't know if you should feel special or not, but it is a first. So I know we talked last time all about the Coca Cola Trail. You wrote two really awesome books about that. What's been going on since those two books and the last time we talked?
Well, we've done a shipwreck story, and it is an amazing story that I just sort of stumbled into by accident. As it turns out, it is, in fact, the only shipwreck of its kind ever on the Great Lakes. And the reason I can say that, in the Great Lakes, there are a lot of automobiles on the bottoms of the Great Lakes, okay? Because there were boats that used to haul them. There has never been any other shipwreck other than this one where the cars were rescued too. Not only the crew, but the cars. And that's what makes it a pretty interesting story.
For sure. No, and I want to get all into that for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've been busy in the last year. I think we talked about a year ago. Other than the shipwreck thing, I don't know if that's consumed you, but I just want to know how life's been going in the last year. I don't get to talk to people a second time normally, so I just want to kind of hear your update beyond this book.
Well, it's been good. And actually, my wife sort of said that she lost me for a year because I got really addicted to this story. And the more I got researching it, the more I wanted to research it. So it was a good year of research and finding things that had never been told before. And right now, I'm talking to you from northern Wisconsin, almost upper Michigan.
Huh.
And my wife and I have been able to get into upper Michigan. The book was actually released July 9th in upper Michigan at a lighthouse museum. So we were up there for that. And it's an area, a wonderful area to visit in the summertime. But unless you're really in love with a lot of snow, not a good place to go in the wintertime. So we were up there. We enjoyed it. We've had our health has been good, and we're blessed to be living a pretty good life.
That's awesome. Yeah, my fiance's from Wisconsin, the upper part of Wisconsin, so I know all about. We go to the UP sometimes. What's got you there now? Obviously, you said that they were releasing the boat, which we're going to talk about the shipwreck soon. But have you moved there, or is it just like a visit, or you said you're in Wisconsin now? I know you were in.
Jackson is kind of a combination. The town I'm in right now, Eagle River, Wisconsin, way north. This is where I went to high school.
Oh,
and so we have what now has become a little summer home up here. Gotcha. So we come up when it gets so hot in Louisiana, it's a good place to escape from. And it's actually because of that I had discovered this story a year ago. We were up on summer vacation, if you want to call it that. We're only 50 miles away from the upper Michigan, the upper peninsula border. And we go up there a lot. It's pretty country. And, back in the 60s or 70s, I guess it was, when I was in television news in Green Bay, I used to come up to the upper peninsula of Michigan covering news stories. And that's really when I first realized what a unique place it was, and sort of got addicted to being here on a regular basis.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense definitely if you grew up there, you went to high school there, because I can only imagine if you were native to Louisiana and now you're going to go up to Wisconsin and spend even a moment of winter there, that would be the shock of your life, I feel like, compared to the swamps of Louisiana.
I'll tell you though, I miss Louisiana. I'll be glad to get back. We're going to be back probably by the 1st of October, and we've got a pretty, I don't want to say fancy, but a comfortable home on a pretty bayou in Louisiana, and we're far enough up in the state that we don't get those horrible effects from hurricanes. We get minor effects, but the people in our area, fantastic people, and you can't beat Louisiana food and music. So, we got the best of both worlds, guy,
Absolutely. You're living the life. And I want to talk about what's kind of consumed you for the past year. And that is this wreck that you've now written a book about. I mean, I've got some individual questions about it, but if you would just kind of introduce us to the shipwreck that happened on one of the Great Lakes.
Well, what it this was 1925. And at that time, a lot of your new cars were being shipped by big boats because you didn't have the highway system and the big trucks then that could haul cars. This particular boat, and it was called the City of Bangor, long story why, but anyhow, it left Detroit in November of 1925 with 240 1926 brand new Chryslers and 6 Whippets. Yeah, the Whippet was made in Toledo, and somehow they got 6 of them over to Detroit and got them on that boat. So they were headed to Duluth. That was the destination, Duluth. And as it turns out, they got into a bad storm going up through Lake Huron, were able to get into Lake Superior, but decided they better seek shore. So they actually, not seek shore, seek shelter. So they actually went into the area where, you remember the Edmund Fitzgerald? Mm-hmm. Well, this place is called Whitefish Bay, and that's where the Edmund Fitzgerald had hoped to go. but didn't make it. Well, they went in there, they spent a day, and it looked like things were, kind of getting less concerned. So they took off again, thinking that they would go to Duluth. They got into Lake Superior, and they got near the Keweenaw Peninsula. Now, the Keweenaw Peninsula, that's that piece of upper Michigan that sticks way north into Lake Superior. And it gets cold up there, cold and nasty. And November is the worst month to be on Lake Superior. But there they were. Well, they get into Lake Superior, they get into a bad storm. In fact, the captain described it as the worst storm he'd ever been in. And the boat gets tossed around, they lose the rudder, lose control. It ultimately crashes on a reef. It doesn't sink. This is the key to the story. It is crashed, but it is basically demolished. I mean, it's gashed, it's bad, it's junk, But it's high on this reef in Lake Superior near Copper Harbor, which that's the tip of the Keweenaw. So we now the story gets pretty serious. We have a boat with 26 crewmen and a captain stranded on a reef, and we're going to try to rescue the crew, first of all. Well, the crew is able to get a lifeboat chopped free from ice, and they are able to get to shore. They kind of, back and forth with the lifeboat until they get everybody to shore. Now, where it gets pretty difficult, some of these guys are from Detroit. They thought they were going to Duluth. There's actually some of them that are poorly dressed for what they're about to meet. Some of them are wearing loafers, So they're on shore. Mistake number two, they think that they have gone past Copper Harbor. They think that they are west of Copper Harbor. Well, the truth of the matter is they're east of Copper Harbor. So they get on shore, and there's no communications in that days. Nobody knows where they are, or in fact, if the ship has wrecked. But they think, okay, we're west of Copper Harbor. Let's start walking east. We'll get to Copper Harbor. Well, that was a mistake. They were already east of Copper Harbor, and they walked for several hours before they realized the mistake was made. They turned around. They made it back to about where the boat, sat offshore, and they proceeded to really get lost and cold, and came very close to freezing to death. It was only a coincidence that another boat had run ashore and had contacted the Coast Guard rescue guys, and they had taken off to rescue this other crew, and that boat was east of where the Banger was. The weather was so bad that when the Coast Guard rescue boat went by the Banger, he didn't even see it. And he picked up these other crewmen, was headed back. He was going to take them to Copper Harbor. And all of a sudden he sees the boat. So they go in and he looks at the boat. Well, it's abandoned, obviously. So he continues on. And about, 10 minutes later, all of a sudden they spot the crew. And they're in a little bay, alongside a bay. And they're really in bad shape. Just the snow, we've got places up there in November, the snow was already 4 or 5 feet deep. So the captain kind of pulls in there and he yells at them. He says, "Build a fire. I'll come back and rescue you after I get these guys taken to Copper Harbor." So he does. He gets them all to Copper Harbor. Now, Copper Harbor in those days was probably maybe 36 people. We're not talking a big town here. So you've got two crews that have basically doubled the population of that little community. What are you going to do with them? Well, the first rescued crew they were in pretty good shape. They hadn't gone through what the second one had. So the Coast Guard rescue boat takes them to the rescue station, which is about 15 miles to the west at Eagle Harbor. So now we have the other guys at Copper Harbor, and a family says, we'll take them in. Get them to us. We'll take care of them. And it was only like less than a half a mile from where they were at the dock to this family home. And they almost didn't make it. The one son went out to guide them in, and he couldn't understand why they were keep falling down and so, but they were almost frozen to death. The home was occupied by the Berg, B-E-R-G-H family. And they, fortunately, Mr. Berg had slaughtered 2 hogs before winter, so they had pork. Okay. And he had a cow that was a pretty good milk producer, and they had chickens. So they had food. The question is, if this is gone, what are we going to do till spring, But nevertheless, they get them in, and the first thing the crew does is they just collapse. There's a big wood-burning stove. They collapse around it and begin to literally thaw out, But they're really in bad shape. So we have an interesting connection to an Indiana family. When I started researching the story, I was able to find the granddaughter of this family that saved the crewman. And her name is Martha Lance. She lives in Osceola, Indiana. And she actually has a kind of a getaway summer home they go to up in the Upper Peninsula. And she agreed to meet me and tell me more of the story. And it's just amazing the things that she revealed about how they were able to save the crewman. And in the book, I have her permission to reproduce the first mate from the boat. After that, they all finally ended up at the hospital 40 miles away. And little by little, as they recovered, they went back to their individual hometowns. Well, the first mate, when he went back, he sent a late Christmas card to this family, thanking them for saving the lives of all of the crewmen. She found that card, and we have been able to reproduce it in the book. It just, when I read that card, it was so personal, and it just, you choked up when you read it. Here's the man that his crew was saved, and he's thanking this family for saving them. So it was, and that's the kind of the help we found in putting the book together. So, ultimately the crew is saved. They get to a hospital. They get there either by sleigh, or there was an individual that had created a snow vehicle. He took an old, like 1924 car, put skis on the front of it and tracks on the back. And he was able to get the doctor up from Lorien to take care of some of the badly hurt ones before even getting some of them down to the hospital. So just, again, coincidence, and good things happen for the crew. But, Jackson, we still got a boat, and a boat that's abandoned, it's trashed, and it's got 200 and some cars on it. So now what are we going to do?
Right. Well, one thing I want to ask you too is, from the time that this boat crashed to the time they were saved, how long was this process, or this period that they were out in the cold and in the deep snow?
Well, they were in the snow for over 2 days, wandering. They had no idea where they were. And it was only because the Coast Guard rescue boat saw them and got them into Copper Harbor and ultimately into shelter. So that was 2 days. And then they were at this home for over a week. Little by little, they were transported, all of them, to the hospital 40 miles away in Lorien, Upper Peninsula. So they had a pretty tough time up there before they even got good medical attention. And the story is, little by little, they were released from the hospital. There were some that stayed there several months before they were released. And I was told by someone who had interviewed one of the nurses at the hospital before she passed away that there were at least a couple of the crewmen who took a liking to their nurses and decided to settle down and live in the Upper Peninsula. I haven't been able to track them down, but I would believe it would have happened.
That's funny. And I'm just thinking of that family too, that, I mean, they had food, but to feed another 20 people for over a week, I hope the rest of the town helped them out once that started running dry come January after all of that.
Well, and we get into the story of how we finally get the road open. So that did allow them later to replenish their pantry. Okay. But that's part of the car rescue.
Yeah.
So now we got the cars. How are we going to rescue the cars?
Right. One other thing I want to ask before we get to the cars is how big is this boat that we're talking about? Obviously, I know ocean freighters and things like that carry cars. I assume two things, with it being so long ago and then also being in the Great Lakes rather than the ocean. I assume it's smaller, but how big is this boat?
It wasn't small. It was originally built to be an ore carrier. And it did that for like 20 years before the company that was transporting autos bought it and added it to a fleet of 11 that he had. But it was substantial. To show you how big it was, the year before the accident, it took a load of cars into Chicago. It set at that time a record for a number. It had 500 cars on that ship. And when it got to Chicago, there was a big banner, record-setting ship, and the mayor was there and the police department. It was a big deal. But they were big ships. What they did when they would convert them, they would level the top deck. Normally, you had the holes where you dump iron in or whatever. So they'd level that top deck, and then they would build a lower deck underneath, and they'd put in an elevator. So you had cars on top, and you had cars on the bottom. 500 cars takes up a lot of space. Even 240 takes up a lot. So it's a good-sized boat. Somewhere I've got the measurements, but I'd be guessing to tell you right now, but it was big. And it was so big that when it got up on the reef, the weight of the boat just gashed it, and it was so high on the reef that they couldn't get it down. They got a tug in there. They were going to try to salvage the boat at one point, and they couldn't get it down. So there was a lot of weight sitting on top of that reef with or without the cars.
Yeah. Well, I've been holding you back. So let's talk about how they rescue these cars. I'm glad they focused on the people first, but how did they get the cars later on?
Well, Walter Chrysler decided that he wanted to get his cars back. So he hired a salvage company out of Duluth, and they concocted an idea, and it worked. Now, the accident was the end of November. They waited until January, the middle of January, and the ice froze around the reef. So what they were able to do at that point is build a ramp from the ice up to the top deck, and little by little, they got the cars off of the ship. At least they got that accomplished, and onto the ice that surrounded the reef. But now what are you going to do with them, right? Well, at first they thought maybe we could get them to shore and on the ice, and we build a road to Copper Harbor. Well, that didn't work. Then somebody said, wait a minute, the ice is strong enough. If we hug the shoreline, we could drive these cars along the shoreline to this little town of Copper Harbor. Sounded like a plan, and it did work, but a couple glitches. Some of the cars didn't have batteries, okay? And some of them that had batteries, the batteries were dead. So they drive the cars that were possible to drive to Copper Harbor. They take out the batteries, they go back and get some more. This was a bit of a project, but they finally got all 240 cars and the whippets, the 6 whippets, to Copper Harbor. So here they are. They're sitting in a little farmer's field in Copper Harbor. It's a great picture. I've got a picture in the book of all these cars in this town, population, 36 people, So here they sit. So, Walter still wants his cars. So the next step in their plan would get the road plowed from Copper Harbor to Calumet. It's about 40 miles. And they don't plow that road in the wintertime. It's not much of a road to start with. So what they do, they get 2 different highway crews. There's 2 counties up there. They get both counties involved. They have a snow plow that only works part way because the snow is so deep. They end up bringing in like a turbine type blower plow from Minnesota that was still in development stage, but it worked. And they were plowing literally through snow. At some points, it was 10 feet or more deep. To tell you why, that area this past winter, the upper peninsula of Michigan, got 300 and some inches of snow. So 10 feet is quite possible. They finally get the road open. Okay. So now we've got 200 and some cars sitting in Copper Harbor. And the idea is if you get them to Calumet, get them on a train, and they'll go back to Detroit. Sounds good, right? Okay. So in the meantime, they've been hauling fuel by sleigh and tank up to Copper Harbor. So they got gas in those cars. Now the plan, they're going to pay $5 per person for you to drive that car from Copper Harbor to Calumet. A lot of high school boys didn't go to school that day. They made $5, But the real interesting thing, and this is where the story takes another turn. You think about it. You're being paid $5, and you're driving a brand new Chrysler to Calumet. And you start to think, some of the cars didn't make it to Calumet. They sort of, disappeared. Not a lot, but I've had, since the book came out, I've had a couple of people call me. They'd say, well, my grandfather drove one of those cars, and he knows for sure old so-and-so kept one, this type of thing. We did find one. And the same family in the Keweenaw Peninsula had that car for 69 years, handed it down from one to another in the family. That car ultimately was driven 200,000 miles driving around in the Upper Peninsula. And today, you can see that car. It's at a lighthouse museum in Eagle Harbor. And when you look at it, they'll show you an axe mark on the car where they cut the ice off of it to get it off the boat, So what besides would tell the story of the cars and the crew, we were then able to track down the history of the car. And there's a picture in there of the car going through one of the early vehicle inspection sites, the safety sites. And the Michigan inspector who was there told the man, he said, I've never seen a car in here this old or with this many miles on it, So, it truly was amazing how that car survived. Now, remember, there were 6 whippets on there. And I guarantee you, all the whippets must have stayed in the peninsula. Why would, Walter Chrysler or his insurance company pay to bring back somebody else's cars? We found 2 of them. There's a picture of one in the book. It's under a shed that was falling down, and we were able to track it at least to the point where it was finally sold again. We also talked to a woman who is with the Historical Society up there that many, many decades ago, she bought a whippet at an estate sale. And she drove it for quite a while. And she said, yes. And she showed me a picture. It was a whippet. So we know for sure 2 of the 6, and probably the other 4, were around the peninsula for a while. The other 4 probably just got trashed, finally. But so it's interesting. But you know what, Jackson, we still got a boat sitting on a reef. It's empty. It's got no crew. It's got no cars, but it's lodged up on this reef. And as hard as they brought in a tug. They tried to get it off. They were going to reef float it, use it for a salvage barge. It just sat there. It became almost a tourist attraction. People would walk out, oh, there's the boat. Take pictures. Finally, World War II, we need steel. And a salvage company said, we're going to get it. And they went out there with torches and equipment, and they cut that boat right down to the water line and salvaged the steel. In the book, there's a couple pictures of the steel being dragged away and so forth. But that wasn't the end of the salvage. There was also, I call it the Midnight Salvage Company. A couple guys who had been working in the woods cutting down trees said, we could make more money if we could get some of that steel than cutting down these trees. So they concocted, you'll see the picture of the book, this unusual high-wheeled truck with a big winch on the back of it. And they went out there and literally dragged what was left of it out of the water and cashed it in for some pretty good steel money in those days. But it took 18 years to finally get that boat, piece at a time, off the reef. So it's the story is it goes in so many directions, Jackson. It's an amazing story.
It is, and just between paying everybody $5 to drive it, having to get all these people involved in plowing 40 miles, all of these cars having the issues that they did. I just feel like that sounds so expensive. I feel like we're probably still paying 50 cents on our Chryslers for what they had to pay with all this. That's crazy.
Well, and it's kind of my ending to the book. I make reference to, you hear the saying, it takes a village. Well, you know what? It took a peninsula. How many 100 people, one way or another, were affected by this one shipwreck off the peninsula on a reef? I mean, you had people that drove the cars, people that saved the crew, people that were on the snowplow crews. It took a peninsula.
Yeah, that's crazy. And we're talking about too, all of you're talking about how you found this person and then you found the cars. I just wonder what goes into this research. Obviously, a lot of people, definitely in podcasting, they find all their information. They go dig deep on the internet on someone else's research. I mean, even with the Coca Cola stuff we talked about, you do all this stuff yourself. You do the legwork yourself. How do you go about doing this? How do you go and find the granddaughter of somebody who, took people in? How do you go about finding these cars? I don't even know how. I mean, what's that process like?
Well, we were lucky in finding the granddaughter because she had posted. There's a special Facebook page that Yoopers, someone that lives in the Upper Peninsula is a Yooper. The Yoopers will post little messages on. And she had just posted a little message about how her grandparents had been involved in this rescue. And the interesting thing is that I don't want to say it's a secret, but it's not on any of the shipwreck maps. I looked at them all. You have to really dig to find somebody that even knows about it. I found her. I tracked her down, and she was She still is in Indiana, but it was just stumbling into something on the internet. I went to archives, and to show you what an unknown shipwreck story this is, I went to the first place I went in looking for information was to the archives at Michigan Tech University. Now, Michigan Tech is at Houghton, which is 40 miles south of where this happened. And the first person I talked to in the archives at Tech had never heard of this, had never heard of the wreck. Hmm. Fortunately, there was somebody else in the archives that had, and they were able to get me a few newspaper articles and a couple pictures. But again, it was just digging. You went to, I went to historical sites. I went to different societies. I ran ads in the newspaper. You just keep digging, and something will come up. And little by little, we were able to get in the book. There's some fantastic photos of the rescue of the cars. And the reason we were able to get those, the Coast Guard rescue captain was an amateur photographer. So he had a heyday taking pictures. And fortunately, his granddaughter was able to keep those pictures and to share them. They're in the museum up there, and I was able to get access to many of them. So it made a big difference in the making of the book. And again, it was, I was able to interview a person who had interviewed before these people passed on, crew members. And he had kept some pretty good notes of those interviews. So a lot of the comments that are made by crew members in the book, these are secondhand from an interview that went to someone that I interviewed. And it's finding those people and getting the stories and getting some pictures, and the one picture, it drives me crazy. It's the Holy Grail, okay? When they got the cars to Calumet and they're going to load them on the train, the newspaper in Calumet, which there isn't anymore, but they had done 2 articles, which I got, that said the cars are coming, the cars are here, they're going to be loaded, there's a special crew from Detroit going to load them. It had all the details on these old newspaper articles. Do you think somebody from that newspaper would have gone over and taken a picture of a car on a train? Probably. It doesn't. I searched, and I even went to railroad historical societies and museums, thinking maybe somebody there would have the picture. My only hope is, now that the book is out, and it's only been out for 6 weeks, that somebody will read the book and will say, Grandpa drove one of those cars, and in our family album, we've got a picture of Grandpa by one of the cars on the train. Maybe that picture is yet to come, and if it does, it'll be in the next printing of the book for sure.
There you go. No, that's cool for sure. And I feel like this is going to be a tough question, but we obviously talked before all about the history of Coca-Cola. I feel like it's kind of just your brand to go and do this deep digging. Which project did you find the most enjoyable to research? I'm sure that's tough, kind of picking a baby, but which one was more enjoyable?
Well, right now, of course, it's all fresh in my mind, and I'm getting so much response.
Yeah,
the book's only been out 6-7 weeks, and I've had great media interviews, just like with you. We've been going to events. I'm going to be in Calumet on Saturday for the fabulous Pasty Festival. Now, you have to be from Michigan to know what a pasty is, but it's a wonderful treat, okay? And the people up there, the stores, they have purchased a lot of the books for me. And I've had people come up to me and say, finally, somebody put all this together. They're like thanking me for doing it. So obviously there's a feeling, painters paint, writers write. You hope somebody pays attention to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's the reward. Hopefully there's a little cash return too. But the Coca Cola book, that was magic. That book to this day is still being requested by a lot of people. It's being reordered by memorabilia stores, by Coca-Cola places. Mm-hmm. That book will live forever. I mean, I still get, people want to talk to you. You talk about your interview. I had a person from Dubai send me an email and say, would you interview on my station? We have the biggest radio station in Dubai. So I emailed him back and I said, I'll be glad to, but what do you know about Coca-Cola? Why? Why are you asking me? He said, our soccer stadium is the Coca-Cola Stadium. Okay. And everybody over here drinks Coca-Cola. Yeah. The magic, Jackson, the magic of that word Coca-Cola has taken me all over. So you never know. You start out to do a little story and you end up with something that impacts your life forever. And that's a reward. That's a bigger reward than the money made in selling the books.
Absolutely. I remember the passion you had with that. And both the books that you wrote, One Coca-Cola, are great. You were nice enough to send those to me. I've read them both, enjoyed them immensely. So I know the passion behind it is felt by the people who's reading them too. I'm sure that this book is awesome too. You talked before. I think you talked before we started about you telling your wife and you kind of just being immersed in this. So given you talked about painters paint, farmers farm, writers write. What does she think when she sees you start getting attached to a new topic and all of a sudden she realizes that you're about ready to go off and start researching heavy on these things? Is she like, oh no, not again? Or is she egging you on? I mean, I assume she's been dealing with this for a while. Most of the listeners can't hear, but I mean, you're not necessarily fresh out of college. We'll say that.
Yeah. Well, and she, bless her heart, I mean, she's very encouraging of my work. And I make a point to keep her involved in the story as it develops. Mm-hmm. And actually, I can go to her and I can say, Shirley, what do you think? This is what I found. What do you think? Where will this fit in the story? Mm-hmm. So she's a big help. I can bounce ideas off of her and, get some good feedback before we even go to print with the thing. Mm. So fortunately, she's a silent team member, and been a great asset to let me do my crazy things that I do.
No, that's awesome. I like to hear that for sure. How can people find this book?
Well, we have created a website for the book, and it's simply shipwreckedandrescued.com. And it's there. And in fact, today I had 4 people who had gone to the site who have sent me an order for books. And then I had one from Arizona, I had 2 from Michigan, and 1 from Tennessee. So, I mean, and what's interesting, Jackson, it's not just people interested in the Great Lakes or shipwrecks. I'm getting car collectors because of the uniqueness of the car. There's an antique automobile museum in Iowa. He contacted me and ordered 8 books. He said, my people that visit my museum are going to love this story. Mm-hmm. So, where are we going with it? Again, it's a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise to find so many different people that find something of interest in this book.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I just wonder, we talked about the 2 that stayed on the peninsula. I don't know the record keeping then and whether I don't know that they had VIN numbers. They had any identification numbers. Do we know where any of the other ones that did make their way back to Detroit, whether they're in a museum now or whether there's any left somewhere other than those 2 in the peninsula?
They did have numbers. And in fact, the fellow who is the maritime director at the museum where the car is actually had someone from Chrysler, what it's Fiat Chrysler, whatever it is, come up to the museum and verify that that in fact was the number, that's the car. My only hope is that maybe somebody, now that the book is out and you and I are talking, somebody will say, I've got one of those. You know, I mean, the one car we found, when the guy that bought it, he didn't know until the dealer told him that, yeah, that car stayed here on the peninsula and I can sell it to you. It came off the boat. See what happened, there were two cars that we know for sure went to this dealer. One was the one that now exists in the museum. There was another one, and there's a picture in the book, that was so badly damaged that it was hauled in by slave. And Chrysler sold it to this dealer for $25. So he had that for parts, and he also had this other car that he was able to sell to the people that kept it in the family for years. You know, and the neat thing about the people that had the car initially, it was one brother. He died. It then went to his brother. Both of the brothers had been on the highway crews plowing the roads open to get the cars down. You know, again, a peninsula. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of people, especially in 1925 on the Keweenaw Peninsula. So I would say, you know, what, a fourth of the population was involved in this particular project.
No, that's really cool for sure. I love the story. I mean, I've got to ask, obviously, this is fresh in your mind. This is kind of what you're focusing on now, but I mean, do you see yourself heading back into another direction? And are we going to be talking in another year about another book?
Yeah, I've got a couple ideas, and I'll have to go back and sort them out. I don't know if we talked the last time about a book I had done about a almost ghost town in Louisiana.
I think you briefly mentioned it, but we were very focused on Coca Cola, so you didn't really say much about it.
Well, I kind of did it. I felt it needed to be done. It was like a hot springs. It was called Hot Wells. It was a health resort town that grew up, that boomed, and then for a lot of reasons, it just almost completely faded away. It was almost a ghost town. Well, I learned while I was up here. See, for a while, the state kept the property. They finally, a few years ago, declared it surplus, set it out for auction. And a real estate person bought a big chunk of it. I asked him when he bought it, I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, I have no idea, but it was too good a deal to pass up. Well, I just learned that about 3-4 weeks ago, a big portion of what he had, which included the major resort site, was sold. And there's an individual that's developing an attraction, primarily an RV park, but an attraction that takes advantage of the name of the water, and they're going to try to reuse the water to some degree. And I actually called him from up here. He's down in Louisiana. And I told him who I was, and he said, oh, I know you. He said, I've read your book twice. And I said, tell me what you're doing. Well, they have a major project going on. What I promised him when I get back, we're going to take a look at it. And we may bring that ghost back to life again in another book. If we don't do that one, I've got a Northwoods one I'm playing with. You know, up here, they have this thing now called vintage snowmobiles. They race vintage snowmobiles, just like they, you know, in automobile racing now, there's a lot of vintage auto racing. Well, I've got one that I'm thinking about, that I call real vintage snow vehicles. Because one of those, in fact, is in my book about the rescue at Copper Harbor. That was a snow vehicle, okay? And it was before all this snowmobile stuff. I also know of one that was made not too far from where I am that was powered by an airplane propeller and was way before the days of snowmobiles as we know them now. Well, in doing just some basic research on that idea, and it would be called something like the real vintage snowmobiles, I found that Studebaker made one, and it is the goofiest looking thing you ever saw. I've got a picture of it. I have contacted the Studebaker archives. They're trying to find out information for me. I may go in that direction, Jackson. I don't know. I've had a lot of people bring me a lot of ideas, and I guess those are the current ones. So we'll talk in a year.
I love it. I mean, I'm excited for it. Well, I've appreciated your time. I knew that once I saw you back on the website with a new book and a new story that I had to speak with you. I loved the whole conversation about Coca-Cola and them, kind of the tagline, the jumping point of that, and the thing that people have said to me about that interview was they found it so fascinating. The whole Coca-Cola kind of stole Santa Claus, so to speak. And people who want to know a little bit more about that, obviously go check out that other interview, but it's always fascinating to speak with you. So I really appreciate your time today.
Well, I appreciate the time being here and the chance, of course. You know what they say, everybody thinks their baby is the prettiest, but I think I got a pretty good baby here. So I had a chance to talk about it. So I appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely.
So that was Larry Jorgensen, amazing guy, such a fascinating story. I think if you're at all interested in anything history, certainly something that you probably have never heard of, I'm sure you enjoyed that. But Larry, I'm always I'm fascinated by him. I'm just so enamored by the way that he does this research, and he's able to find people that was actually involved in the things that he's talking about. So if you're at all interested in picking up the book, I have it here myself. Great read. Go check it out. He told you how to find it. As easy as shipwreckedandrescue.com. You can go find it there. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to go pick that up. I don't think that you will regret it at all if you think, man, that story was quick. I'm sure there's other parts to it. There certainly is. So go pick it up. Find out a little bit more details on the whole thing. But I'm fascinated by Larry, like I said. I hope to see him again. Maybe he can be the first third-time guest when he talks about whether it's, snow vehicles, whether it's a lot of different things. So I'm fascinated to see what he comes up with next, and go check him out. I do want to, tell y'all, this is after episode 104. The contest is over. I have reached out to the winner. So if you got an email, then congratulations. Next week I'll let you know whether that person has responded. They have not yet. So I'll let you know if they responded and the contest is officially over. If not, then obviously we'll have to go to the next winner. But I do appreciate everyone who did enter. So happy about that. I'm so happy that you've decided to stay with me for 105 episodes now. That contest was for the 100th episode. Been a pleasure. So, yeah, go check out the book. Go check out Larry. Of course, go follow us on Instagram, Not Enough Podcast. On Facebook, Not Enough with Jackson Huff, jacksonhuff.com. Go give us that 5-star review on Apple and on Spotify. Write a review on Apple. That's always awesome. But yeah, appreciate you being here. We'll catch you next time. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.